There's a quiet truth most people never hear, and when they finally do, it changes everything they thought they knew about themselves. Not all at once, not like a lightning strike, more like the slow warmth of sunrise slipping through the curtains, gently, patiently, until the darkness simply has nowhere left to hide. For most of our lives, we've been taught to think of ourselves as solid, fixed, almost mechanical. We say things like, "That's just who I am," or "people don't really change," as if our personality were carved out of stone somewhere long ago. We build entire identities around old memories, old mistakes, old labels, and then we carry them like heavy suitcases everywhere we go. But if you sit quietly and really look, not with fear, not with judgment, just with curiosity, you begin to notice something extraordinary. Nothing about you is actually fixed. Not your body, not your mind, not even the story you tell yourself about who you are. When science peers deeply enough into matter, it doesn't find something solid and unmoving. It finds motion. It finds vibration. It finds particles appearing and disappearing like fireflies in the night. What we once believed was dense and permanent turns out to be mostly space. Alive, dynamic, dancing. And that includes you. Your body is not a statue you live inside. It is a living river. Every day, quietly and without asking for your permission, your brain forms new connections, rewires old pathways, and reshapes itself according to what you think, what you feel, and what you focus on. Memories are not stored like files in a cabinet. They are recreated, updated, and rewritten each time you remember them. The person you were years ago does not exist in the same biological form anymore, because even your cells have renewed themselves again and again, like leaves growing back each spring. On the most microscopic level, the atoms that make up your body are not sitting still like bricks in a wall. They are moving, vibrating, swirling in vast fields of space that scientists still struggle to fully understand. There is more emptiness inside you than solidity, more movement than stillness. In a very real sense, you are not a thing at all, you are an event. You are something happening. So when you begin to feel like your old identity no longer fits, when the roles you once played start to feel tight around the chest, when the life you carefully constructed begins to crack at the edges, perhaps the problem isn't that you are falling apart. Perhaps it is simply that you are changing, the way everything in nature changes. Think about the seasons for a moment. A tree doesn't accuse itself of failure when its leaves fall. It doesn't cling desperately to summer, trying to tape the leaves back on. It allows the cycle. It trusts the intelligence of life moving through it. There is a season of blooming, a season of fullness, and then a season of release. From the outside, winter might look like death, but inside the roots, something quiet and essential is happening. Energy is being redirected. Strength is being gathered. Life is preparing for another expression. You are not separate from that same intelligence. You move in cycles too, yet the mind, especially the ego, wants permanence. It wants certainty. It wants to wake up every morning and say, "This is who I am, and this is how my life will always be." The ego believes stability equals safety. So when change begins to stir inside you, when your interests shift, when your values rearrange themselves, when the old ambitions no longer excite you, the ego panics and whispers, "Something is wrong. You're losing yourself." But what if you're not losing yourself at all? What if you're losing only the mask? There is a difference, because the mask is constructed. The self is not. The mask is built from expectations, from childhood conditioning, from years of trying to fit into a world that often asked you to shrink or perform. The mask says, be strong, be impressive, be successful, be who they want you to be. And for a long time, maybe that worked. Maybe it helped you survive. Maybe it helped you build a life. But at some point, the soul gets tired of pretending. At some point, something deeper inside you begins to knock. And when that knocking gets louder, you might feel confused. You might feel emotional. You might feel strangely sensitive to everything around you. You might find yourself wanting more quiet, more space, more meaning. Things that once mattered start to feel shallow. Conversations that once entertained, you begin to feel empty. You might look at yourself and think, why can't I just be the way I used to be? But imagine asking a caterpillar to go back to crawling after it has already begun to grow wings. It wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't be natural, and it wouldn't be possible. Because transformation is not a mistake in the system. It is the system. Life is not designed for you to stay the same. Life is designed for you to evolve, to expand, to become more conscious, more aligned, more authentic with each passing year. When your inner vibration shifts, when your awareness deepens, the old version of you simply cannot remain intact. It would be like trying to hold ice in the sun and expecting it not to melt. The melting isn't failure, it's the next form of water. So perhaps the discomfort you feel isn't evidence that you're broken. Perhaps it's evidence that something outdated is dissolving. Perhaps the sadness, the uncertainty, the strange in-between feeling is just the space between who you were and who you are remembering yourself to be. And this remembering doesn't require force. You don't have to fix yourself into a better version. You don't have to struggle your way into wholeness. In fact, the more you fight, the more exhausted you become, because you're swimming against a current that is trying to carry you somewhere gentler. Awakening rarely comes through effort. It comes through allowance, through softening, through finally taking a breath and saying, maybe I don't need to control everything. Maybe I can trust this process. When you stop gripping the steering wheel so tightly, life begins to steer you in ways you could never have planned with the mind alone. You start to notice small synchronicities, subtle guidance, a quiet intuition that feels wiser than logic. You begin to sense that there is an intelligence moving through you, the same intelligence that moves the stars, the oceans, the trees. And when you feel that, even for a moment, something relaxes inside your chest. Because deep down, you realize you were never meant to stay frozen in one identity forever. You were meant to flow. You were meant to change. You were meant to unfold, layer by layer, like a flower opening to the morning light. So, the next time you look in the mirror and feel unfamiliar to yourself, don't rush to label it as something wrong. Don't assume you're malfunctioning. Maybe what you're experiencing is far more sacred than that. Maybe life is simply reshaping you, gently, intelligently, guiding you back to the truest version of who you have always been. 1. The feeling of being broken is only the story of the ego. There is a moment that almost everyone goes through, though very few people talk about it out loud. A quiet moment when you sit at the edge of your bed late at night or stare out the kitchen window while the coffee grows cold in your hands, and a heavy thought drifts through you like a slow cloud, whispering that perhaps something inside you isn't working the way it should, that perhaps you missed some instruction manual for life that everyone else seems to have received. And in that moment, you don't feel dramatic or tragic. You simply feel tired, confused, and quietly disappointed in yourself. And because we have lived for so long inside a culture that worships strength, productivity, and control, the very first conclusion we jump to is that we must be failing at something. From the time we were young, we were gently and sometimes harshly trained to believe that a good life means constant progress, constant certainty, constant competence, as if being human were a performance review that never ends, as if we were required to always smile, always achieve, always keep everything together no matter what storms were happening inside our chest. We learned to admire the ones who never seemed to break, who worked long hours, who never complained, who always had a plan. And without realizing it, we began measuring ourselves against that image, promising silently that we too would be strong, that we too would hold it all together, that we too would never fall behind. So when the day finally comes that your energy fades, when getting out of bed feels heavier than it used to, when your heart no longer races with excitement for the same goals that once drove you, when you find yourself wanting rest instead of ambition, quiet instead of noise, meaning instead of applause, the mind does not interpret this as transformation. It interprets this as failure. You start saying things to yourself that you would never say to someone you love, telling yourself that you are lazy, ungrateful, weak, or broken, wondering why you cannot just push through like you used to, wondering why you cannot simply go back to the person you once were. And all of this suffering begins with a story, not reality, just a story. A story that says your worth depends on how much you produce, how well you perform, and how successfully you control every outcome in your life. But that story does not come from your soul. It comes from the ego, and the ego, for all its cleverness, is a terrible narrator. Because the ego survives through comparison. It is always looking sideways, always measuring, always calculating who is ahead and who is behind, who is winning and who is losing, and it builds your identity out of these endless judgments like a house made of thin glass, fragile and exhausting to maintain. The ego whispers, "Look at them. They are doing better than you." And then it whispers, "Look at you. You should be further by now." And then it whispers, "If you slow down, you will disappear." So you keep running, even when your legs are shaking, even when your heart is begging for rest. Living this way feels normal because everyone around you is doing the same thing. Yet deep inside there is a quiet ache. The ache of never feeling like you are enough exactly as you are. But here is the gentle truth that took me many years, many mistakes, and many dark nights to understand. And I want to offer it to you the way a friend would, softly, without pressure. Your soul has never judged you once, not once. While the ego keeps score, the soul simply witnesses. While the ego compares, the soul embraces. While the ego says you should be more, the soul quietly says, you already are. The soul does not speak the language of success or failure, because it is not concerned with how impressive your life looks from the outside, and it has never been interested in trophies or titles, or the opinions of strangers. The soul only cares about aliveness, about authenticity, about whether you are living in alignment with what is true inside your heart. And sometimes, what the ego calls breaking down is actually the soul breaking through. Sometimes the exhaustion you feel is not weakness, but resistance finally wearing out. Sometimes the tears you cannot explain are not signs that you are damaged, but signs that an old armor is dissolving. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack for decades without ever taking it off, filled with expectations, fears, and roles you agreed to play just to be loved, and then one day your shoulders begin to ache so badly that you can no longer ignore the pain, and you sit down and gently set the backpack on the ground. From the ego's perspective, that looks like giving up. From the soul's perspective, that looks like freedom. This is why awakening often feels so confusing at first, because it does not look like becoming stronger in the way the world defines strength. It looks more like becoming softer, more honest, more willing to admit that you are tired of pretending. And the moment you stop pretending, the old story begins to collapse. The story that said you had to earn your right to exist. The story that said you had to be perfect to be loved. The story that said you were somehow not enough. When that story starts to crumble, it can feel like the ground is disappearing beneath your feet, because for so long you built your identity on those beliefs, even if they hurt you. But what is falling apart was never you. It was only the mask. It was only the costume. It was only the version of you that was trying very hard to survive in a world that forgot how to simply be. And when that mask cracks, something incredibly tender and real begins to breathe underneath. Something that does not need to compete, or prove, or impress. Something that simply exists like a quiet flame that has always been there. This is where awakening truly begins. Not with fireworks or mystical visions, but with the quiet collapse of the sentence, "I am not enough." Because once that sentence loses its power, everything changes. You stop fighting yourself. You stop trying to fix yourself. You stop treating your life like a problem to be solved. And instead, you begin to listen. You begin to sit with your feelings the way you would sit with an old friend, patiently, without rushing them away. You begin to trust that what is happening inside you is not a malfunction but a message, not a breakdown but a rearrangement. And slowly, gently, like the first light before dawn, you realize that you were never broken to begin with. You were simply outgrowing a story that was too small for the truth of who you really are. 2. Feeling lost is a sign you are leaving the old path. There comes a season in life that no one really prepares you for. A season that does not announce itself with dramatic events or loud endings, but arrives quietly like a slow fog rolling in at dawn. And before you even realize what is happening, the familiar landmarks you once relied on begin to fade. And the road you have walked for years suddenly feels strange beneath your feet, as if you woke up one morning inside the same life, yet somehow everything inside you has shifted just enough that nothing fits the way it used to. At first, you try to ignore it because the changes are subtle and easy to dismiss, like a favorite song that no longer moves you the same way, or a conversation that once felt exciting now feeling strangely empty, and you tell yourself that you are just tired, That maybe you need a vacation, maybe you need to try harder, maybe you simply need to be more grateful. Yet, no matter how much you push or reason with yourself, that quiet sense of disconnection lingers like a soft ache that refuses to go away. Things that once felt important begin to lose their color without any clear explanation. And it can be deeply unsettling to look at goals you chased for decades and feel nothing where there used to be fire, because the career you worked so hard to build suddenly feels like a costume you no longer want to wear. The ambitions that once kept you awake at night now feel like someone else's dreams. And even the social circles you used to enjoy can start to feel noisy and exhausting rather than nourishing and alive. You might find yourself sitting in a room full of people you have known for years and still feel like a stranger, smiling politely, while a quiet voice inside asks, "Why do I feel like I don't belong here anymore?" And that question can be frightening because belonging has always felt like safety. And when that sense of belonging dissolves, it can feel as though the ground beneath you is slowly disappearing. So the mind, always quick to protect its old structures, begins to panic and label this experience as a problem, whispering that you are becoming antisocial, unmotivated, or depressed, suggesting that you must have lost your edge or that you are somehow falling behind in life. Because from the ego's perspective, losing interest in the old game looks like failure rather than growth. But what if losing interest is not a symptom of decline? What if it is evidence of evolution? Because sometimes the reason you no longer fit into your old life is not that you are broken, but that you have outgrown it in the same quiet way a child outgrows their childhood bedroom, where the walls are the same and the furniture is the same, but the person standing inside has changed so much that the space can no longer contain who they are becoming. I remember a time in my own life when everything that used to define me started to feel strangely hollow, when achievements that once made me proud barely registered, when conversations about money and status sounded like a foreign language, and I thought something must be terribly wrong with me because I could not force myself to care anymore. And for a while I tried to push through it, tried to motivate myself with the same old rewards, but it felt like trying to light a fire with wet wood. Only later did I understand that life was not taking something away from me. It was gently removing what no longer belonged. There is a quiet intelligence to growth that we often misunderstand, because growth does not always feel expansive and exciting. Sometimes it feels like loss, like emptiness, like wandering through a desert without a map, and the old version of you keeps looking back longingly at the path behind, wishing you could just return to what was familiar even if it was small. Yet nature has always shown us that transformation requires a kind of dissolving before something new can be born. If you watch a caterpillar closely, there is a moment in its life when it disappears into the cocoon, and from the outside it looks like nothing is happening, like it has retreated from the world. But inside something astonishing is taking place, because the caterpillar does not simply grow wings in a neat and orderly way. It actually melts down into something almost unrecognizable, its old structure dissolving into a kind of formlessness before reorganizing into a butterfly. If we could look inside at that stage without understanding the process, we might think something had gone terribly wrong. We might think the creature was dying or falling apart. Yet that breakdown is precisely what makes flight possible. And in many ways, this is exactly what happens during a spiritual awakening. Your old identity, the one built from habits, expectations, and roles you played for years, begins to soften and lose its shape. And because you have known yourself through that identity for so long, its dissolving can feel like losing yourself entirely, like standing in front of a mirror and not recognizing the person looking back at you. This is why feeling lost can actually be a sacred sign, because it often means you are no longer blindly following the path that was handed to you by family, culture, or fear. And you are beginning, perhaps for the first time, to sense that there must be something deeper, something more authentic waiting beneath the surface. The emptiness you feel is not a void to be feared, but a space being cleared. Like a room being emptied of old furniture, so something more honest can finally be placed inside. And although empty rooms can feel cold and echoing at first, they sometimes offer the greatest freedom because they are full of possibility rather than clutter. When you no longer feel excited by the old ambitions, it may be because your heart is searching for meaning rather than validation. When certain relationships fall away, It may be because your nervous system is craving truth rather than performance. When you feel like you do not belong anywhere, it may be because you are slowly coming home to yourself instead of trying to belong to everyone else. And this homecoming does not always feel warm and comfortable at first, because you are meeting parts of yourself that you ignored for years, parts that were waiting patiently in the background while you were busy surviving, achieving, and pleasing others. So if you find yourself in this strange in-between space, where the old life no longer fits and the new one has not yet fully appeared, please do not rush to judge yourself or force quick answers, because this space, uncomfortable as it may be, is incredibly fertile. It is the quiet field where your true self begins to rise. It is the still water where your reflection becomes clear. It is the gentle pause where life whispers, "Stop running. You don't have to chase anymore. You can simply become." And when you begin to trust that this feeling of being lost is not a mistake but a transition, something softens inside your chest, because you realize you are not wandering without purpose. You are simply walking away from a road that was never truly yours, making room for a path that feels more like home with every step. 3. Quantum science reminds you that you were never a fixed object. There is a quiet comfort that comes when we begin to look at ourselves not only through philosophy or spirituality, but also through the lens of science, because for many years people have imagined that awakening belongs only to mystics or monks or those who sit on mountaintops. Yet the deeper modern science looks into the nature of reality, the more it gently confirms what the heart has always known, which is that you are not a rigid, frozen thing moving through a mechanical universe, but a living field of change participating in something far more fluid and intelligent than the mind was ever taught to believe. For most of our lives, we were trained to think of the body as a solid structure, almost like a piece of furniture that we simply carry around from birth until death. And this idea quietly shapes the way we see ourselves, because if the body feels fixed, then the identity must feel fixed as well. And if the identity feels fixed, then every struggle feels permanent, every flaw feels permanent, and every moment of confusion feels like a life sentence rather than a passing season. But when you slow down and really listen to what science is discovering, something begins to soften inside you, because the image of yourself as something heavy and stuck starts to dissolve, and in its place you begin to see a much kinder picture, one that feels less like a prison and more like a river. Your body, the one you look at in the mirror each morning, is not the same body you had years ago, or even months ago, because it is constantly renewing itself in ways so quiet and miraculous that we barely notice them. As old cells die and new ones are born, as tissues repair and rebuild, as systems adjust moment by moment to keep you alive without ever asking for applause. Which means that even now, as you sit here breathing, parts of you are being replaced, refreshed, and gently reassembled like a house being restored piece by piece. There is something deeply reassuring about realizing that you are not carrying the exact same physical self from the past, because it means you are not trapped inside old versions of who you were. And the mistakes you made years ago are not etched permanently into your biology, and the pain you once carried is not frozen in your flesh, since life itself keeps giving you quiet chances to begin again through this continuous renewal. And then there is the brain, that mysterious landscape of memory and meaning, which for a long time people believed was mostly fixed after childhood. Yet we now know that this is not true at all, because the brain is endlessly adaptable, constantly reshaping its own wiring through what scientists call neuroplasticity, which simply means that every thought you repeat, every emotion you dwell in, every belief you nurture, is slowly carving new pathways, like water shaping stone over time, turning experience into structure and attention into architecture. So when you tell yourself that you can never change, that you will always be anxious, always be broken, always be limited by your past, you are not describing a fact, you are describing a habit. And habits can be rewritten because the brain is not a rigid machine but a living garden. And whatever you water consistently will grow, whether it is fear or trust, shame or compassion, contraction or openness. And if this were not enough to soften the old story of being fixed and flawed, quantum physics takes us even deeper, into a level of reality so subtle that language almost fails, where matter itself begins to lose its solidity and reveals something far more mysterious and beautiful. Because when scientists look closely enough at what we call things, they do not find tiny hard particles like pebbles, but patterns of energy, vibrations, probabilities dancing in what appears to be empty space. At that scale, the world is not made of objects but of movement, not of permanence but of possibility. And the atoms that form your body are mostly space, swirling and shifting in ways that defy the simple logic we were taught in school, which means that even physically, you are far less solid than you imagine and far more dynamic than you were ever told. When I first truly understood this, not just intellectually but emotionally, something inside me relaxed for the first time in years, because I realized that I had been treating myself like a broken machine that needed fixing, when in truth, I was more like music, more like weather, more like a current of energy passing through time. And music does not break, weather does not fail, they simply change form. So perhaps, what you have been calling brokenness is not damage at all, but reorganization. Perhaps the sadness, the confusion, the sense that your old self is dissolving is not evidence that something went wrong, but evidence that something new is trying to come together at a higher level of coherence, the way a radio adjusts its signal when you turn the dial, crackling for a moment before the sound becomes clear. If you have ever tuned an old radio, you know that brief static does not mean the device is broken. It simply means you are between frequencies, moving away from one station and toward another, and for a few seconds everything sounds messy and uncertain, until suddenly the music comes through clean and strong. In many ways, awakening feels exactly like that. It feels like static. It feels like not knowing. It feels like the old signal fading before the new one fully arrives. But the problem is not that you are damaged. The problem is only that you are retuning. You are adjusting your inner frequency, your way of seeing, your way of feeling, your way of being in the world. And as this happens, the old patterns naturally fall away, because they simply do not resonate with who you are becoming. And this is where the language of vibration becomes more than a metaphor. Because your thoughts, your emotions, your attention all carry energetic qualities. And when you live in constant fear, judgment, and self-criticism, your system tightens and contracts. While when you practice presence, compassion, and acceptance, something inside you opens and flows more freely, like a window finally letting fresh air into a long-closed room. Awakening, then, is not about becoming special or mystical or superhuman. It is simply about becoming more conscious. It is about raising the quality of your awareness, the way you relate to yourself and to life, until you no longer live from automatic fear, but from quiet clarity. And when that shift happens, even slowly, even imperfectly, you begin to realize that you were never meant to stay the same person forever. You were never meant to be a fixed object, struggling to hold yourself together. You were always meant to evolve, to reorganize, to rise gently into deeper levels of understanding. So the next time you feel like you are falling apart, pause and remember this softer truth, that you are not crumbling like a broken wall. You are rearranging like a constellation, shifting into a new pattern that makes more sense for who you truly are. And perhaps nothing about you is malfunctioning at all. Perhaps you are simply becoming more alive. 4. Becoming more sensitive does not mean you are weak. There is a stage in this inner journey where many people begin to worry that something is wrong with them, because their emotional world seems to grow larger instead of smaller, deeper instead of tougher. And if you were raised to believe that maturity means becoming harder and less affected by life, this new tenderness can feel confusing, almost like you are moving backward rather than forward, as though all the strength you worked so hard to build is somehow dissolving in front of your eyes. You might notice that your eyes fill with tears more easily than they used to, not only during moments of obvious grief, but also during quiet and ordinary experiences, like watching an old couple holding hands at the grocery store, or hearing the wind move gently through the trees outside your window. And you may feel embarrassed by this softness, because the world has trained you to hide such reactions, to swallow your feelings, to remain composed and efficient no matter what is happening inside your heart. There may be evenings when a memory rises unexpectedly and touches you so deeply that you have to sit down just to breathe. Or mornings when you sense the mood of a room the moment you walk in, picking up on tension or sadness or joy before anyone says a single word. And this heightened perception can feel overwhelming at times, like your skin has grown thinner, and everything reaches you more directly than before. The mind, still operating from old definitions of strength, quickly labels this as fragility and whispers that you are becoming too emotional, too delicate, too easily affected by other people's energy, and it suggests that you should toughen up, distract yourself, or return to the numbness that once helped you function without feeling so much. But there is a quiet truth that took me many years to understand, and I offer it to you now, not as theory, but as something learned through experience, through nights of confusion and days of slow clarity. And that truth is this: sensitivity is not a weakness, it is a refinement of awareness. For a long time, many of us lived in a state of constant defense without even realizing it, because life demanded that we keep going no matter what, working, providing, surviving, pushing through disappointment after disappointment, and in order to endure all of that pressure, we unconsciously built layers of protection around our hearts, like armor that allowed us to keep functioning, but also kept us from fully feeling. This armor helped us survive, but it also made life feel distant and muted, like watching the world through thick glass. We could still see what was happening, but we could not truly touch it. Then awakening begins to happen, slowly and quietly, and that armor starts to loosen, not because you are failing, but because you no longer need to live in survival mode. And when that armor falls away, the world feels closer, sounds are clearer, emotions are stronger. Other people's pain becomes more visible. Your own heart becomes more honest. It can feel like everything has been turned up a few degrees, like the colors are brighter and the air is sharper, and your inner landscape is suddenly alive with movement. This is not fragility. This is perception returning. Imagine someone who has lived for years in a noisy city and then moves to the countryside, where the nights are so quiet that they can hear their own breath and the smallest rustle of leaves. And at first that silence feels almost uncomfortable because the senses are no longer drowned out by constant noise. Yet slowly they realize that this quiet allows them to hear life more clearly than ever before. In the same way, when you stop numbing yourself and stop forcing strength, you begin to hear the subtle music of life again. You feel more because you are no longer shutting yourself down. And feeling deeply is not a sign that you are breaking. It is a sign that you are waking up. Along with this emotional openness, something else often begins to grow, something quieter but incredibly steady, and that is intuition. You may find that you simply know things without needing to analyze them, that you sense which conversations to avoid, which opportunities to accept, which people feel safe, and which feel draining. And this knowing does not come from logic or planning, but from a deeper place in the body, like a gentle inner compass guiding you step by step. Years ago, you might have ignored this voice because the mind seemed more trustworthy, because you were taught to rely only on reason and evidence. Yet now you begin to realize that this intuitive intelligence has always been there, patiently waiting for you to slow down enough to hear it. It does not shout, it does not argue, it simply whispers, and the more sensitive you become, the easier it is to recognize that whisper. You may also notice a growing desire to spend more time alone, not out of loneliness or rejection of others, but out of a quiet need to return to yourself, to sit in stillness, without performing or explaining, to rest in a space where you can feel your own thoughts and emotions without interference. In the past, being alone might have felt uncomfortable or boring, but now it feels nourishing, like drinking cool water after a long day in the sun. Solitude becomes less of an escape and more of a sanctuary. You begin to understand that constant social noise was exhausting your system, that your nervous system has been running on high alert for years, and that what you truly need is gentleness rather than stimulation. Modern science would describe this as the nervous system recalibrating itself, moving away from chronic stress and into a state of greater regulation and balance. Yet you do not need complicated language to feel what is happening, because you can sense it directly in your body, like a long-held tension finally releasing. Your system is tuning itself, like a musician carefully adjusting the strings of an instrument so that the sound becomes clearer and more harmonious. And when an instrument is finely tuned, it becomes more sensitive, not less. It can detect the smallest variations in tone, It can respond to the lightest touch. That sensitivity is not weakness. It is precision. In the same way, you are not becoming fragile. You are becoming attuned. You are learning to hear life at a deeper level, to notice the quiet signals that were always there, but were drowned out by noise and hurry. So, if you find yourself crying more easily, trusting your intuition more deeply, craving quiet more often, and feeling the world more intensely than before, please do not judge yourself harshly or assume that something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. You are not shrinking. You are opening. You are not losing strength. You are discovering a softer, wiser strength that does not come from resisting life, but from embracing it fully. And from where I stand now, after walking through my own darkness and confusion, I can tell you with complete honesty that this tenderness is one of the greatest gifts awakening gives you, because it allows you to finally experience life not as a battle to endure, but as something to truly feel, moment by moment, with an open and unguarded heart. 5. Crises are not punishments. They are invitations. There are seasons in life when everything you once leaned on begins to fall away at the same time, as if the ground itself has quietly decided it can no longer hold the weight of the person you used to be. And in those moments, it can feel less like growth and more like collapse, less like guidance and more like abandonment. Yet if you stay present long enough, you may begin to sense that something deeper and more intelligent is rearranging the architecture of your inner world with a precision that the thinking mind could never design. Heartbreak arrives not only as the loss of a relationship, but as the shattering of the story you told yourself about who you were supposed to be beside another person. Unemployment comes not only as the loss of income, but as the dissolving of an identity built around usefulness and productivity. Illness slows the body, not to betray you, but to force you into a stillness you would never voluntarily choose. And grief removes what you love most so that you are gently but firmly guided away from attachment to form and back toward the quiet truth that nothing real can ever be taken from you. When everything collapses at once, it may seem cruel and unnecessary, yet there is a strange mercy hidden inside that unraveling, because the ego survives by holding on to roles, labels, and familiar structures, and once those supports are gone, it has nothing left to cling to, like a vine with no wall to wrap around. And in that unsupported space, the false self begins to loosen its grip, not through effort, but through simple exhaustion. I remember moments in my own life when I tried to fix everything at the same time, with strategies and plans, and endless thinking, believing that if I could just work harder or be smarter, I could rebuild what had broken. And every attempt only deepened the fatigue, because I was trying to reconstruct a house that life had already decided to tear down. And it took me years to understand that the demolition was not a mistake, but an act of compassion. There is a kind of pain that feels sharp and personal, and then there is a deeper pain that feels impersonal and transformative, like the ache of muscles growing stronger after long disuse. And crises often belong to this second kind because they are less about punishment and more about initiation, less about failure and more about being invited into a wider field of consciousness that cannot be entered while you are still tightly holding the old map. When the structures fall away, the ego loses its foothold and you may feel disoriented, frightened, or strangely empty. Yet this emptiness is not the absence of life, but the clearing of space, like a field after harvest that looks barren, yet is quietly preparing for new seeds. And if you resist this emptiness, you suffer twice. But if you allow it, you begin to feel a subtle peace that does not depend on circumstances. Suffering has a way of turning you inward whether you want it or not, because when external solutions fail, the mind has nowhere else to run and must finally sit down in the silence it has avoided for years. And in that silence, you begin to hear a softer voice beneath the noise of fear and expectation, a voice that does not shout or demand but simply knows, a voice that feels less like thinking and more like remembering something ancient and gentle. In the quiet, you may notice that your breath becomes slower and deeper, that your body asks for rest rather than constant activity, that your attention naturally moves away from comparison and towards simple presence. And this is not laziness or withdrawal, but a recalibration of the nervous system, as if your entire being is tuning itself to a more coherent frequency after years of static. From a scientific perspective, the brain under stress begins to reorganize its neural pathways, pruning what no longer serves and strengthening new connections that support resilience and clarity. And from an energetic perspective, you could say that your personal vibration is shifting, releasing old patterns of contraction and opening toward a wider bandwidth of perception. And whether you use the language of neuroscience or the language of consciousness, the message is the same, that transformation often looks like breakdown before it looks like breakthrough. When you stop fighting the crisis and begin listening to it, you may discover that it carries instructions written in the most ordinary details of daily life, such as the sudden desire to simplify your schedule, to walk in nature without headphones, to speak more honestly even if your voice trembles, to let certain relationships fade without drama. And these small movements are not random impulses, but the quiet intelligence of life, guiding you back to alignment. There is also a humbling honesty that emerges during difficult times because you no longer have the energy to pretend or perform. And this honesty can feel raw and vulnerable, yet it is profoundly liberating, like finally setting down a heavy suitcase you forgot you were carrying. And in that unguarded state, you begin to experience connection with others, not through roles or achievements, but through shared humanity. Many people think awakening must arrive as light and bliss and constant clarity. Yet, in my experience, it often begins in the dark, like a seed underground, unseen and misunderstood. And only later do you realize that what felt like burial was actually planting, what felt like ending was actually preparation, and what felt like loss was quietly making room for a deeper and more stable sense of self that cannot be shaken by external change. If you look closely at the most meaningful turning points of your life, you may notice that they rarely came from comfort or control, but from moments when everything familiar dissolved and you were forced to trust something larger than your plans. And though you would never have chosen those moments consciously, they shaped you more profoundly than any success ever could. So when another crisis appears, instead of asking why this is happening to you, you might gently ask what this moment is asking of you. What identity is ready to fall away? What truth is waiting to be acknowledged? What part of you is tired of pretending? And these questions open the door to curiosity rather than resistance, which softens the experience and allows transformation to unfold with less friction. Little by little, you begin to sense that the collapse was never an enemy but a teacher, never a curse but an invitation, guiding you away from the narrow life of constant striving and toward a quieter life of alignment and trust. And from this place, you no longer chase awakening as a dramatic event, because you realize it has been happening all along, through every loss and every tear and every silent night, when you thought nothing was changing. In the end, the crisis becomes a doorway that leads you back to yourself, back to the simple awareness that has always been here beneath the noise, and you step through not with fireworks or grand declarations, but with a soft breath and a steady heart, understanding at last that what broke apart was never truly you, and what remains is something far more spacious, more compassionate, and more real than anything you could have constructed by force. 6. Releasing control. Instead of trying to repair yourself, there comes a quiet moment on the path of inner change, when you begin to notice that all the effort you once believed was necessary to improve yourself has slowly turned into a kind of invisible burden, like carrying a toolbox everywhere you go because you assume something inside you is always broken, and after years of tightening every loose screw and patching every imagined flaw, you finally grow tired enough to ask a simple and honest question about whether you were ever damaged in the first place, or whether you were only taught to see yourself that way. For a long time, I believed that healing meant constant fixing, constant analyzing, constant correcting of every thought and every emotion, as if my inner world were a machine that required endless maintenance. And this belief created a subtle tension that never left my body, because there was always something to improve and always another standard I had not yet reached, which meant peace was always postponed to some distant future that never actually arrived. The modern world reinforces this quiet war against ourselves through language that sounds helpful on the surface, yet carries a hidden violence underneath, telling us to optimize our habits, upgrade our mindset, eliminate weaknesses, and redesign our personality as if we were defective products rather than living beings. And without realizing it, we begin treating our own hearts with the same impatience we would use on a broken device. But there is a profound difference between growth and self-rejection. And many people confuse the two because both involve change. Yet one emerges from acceptance, while the other emerges from fear. And only the first leads to true freedom, because you cannot heal something while secretly believing it should not exist. When you constantly try to fix yourself, you send a quiet message to your nervous system that something is wrong, and the body responds to that message with subtle stress, tightening the muscles, shortening the breath, and keeping the mind on alert as if danger were always near. So even your attempts at self-improvement become another source of tension that distances you from the very peace you seek. I have lived through years like this, where every book I read and every method I practiced became another project to perfect myself. And though I collected knowledge and techniques, my heart still felt tired because I was approaching healing like a battle plan rather than a homecoming. And battles by their nature require enemies. So I unconsciously turned parts of myself into problems that needed to be conquered. Real healing began not when I learned more strategies, but when I grew exhausted enough to stop fighting. When one evening I simply sat in silence with all my unresolved feelings and realized I did not have the strength to fix anything anymore. And in that surrender, something unexpected happened, because the tension I had carried for so long started to soften on its own, without any effort from me. It was then I understood that healing is not an act of force, but an act of permission. Not a struggle upward, but a gentle settling downward into what is already here, like placing a glass of muddy water on the table and allowing the dirt to sink naturally to the bottom, rather than shaking it again and again, hoping it will become clear. Water has always been my quiet teacher in this way, because water never argues with gravity or tries to climb uphill by willpower. It simply follows the path of least resistance, and in doing so, it shapes mountains and valleys over time. And there is a deep wisdom in that softness, because what yields is often stronger than what pushes. When you loosen your grip on yourself and stop demanding constant improvement, your inner world begins to flow in a similar way. Thoughts pass through without getting stuck. Emotions rise and fall like waves rather than storms. And the energy that was once trapped in self-criticism becomes available again for simple presence and creativity. Many people are afraid that if they stop controlling themselves, they will fall apart or become lazy or lost. Yet the opposite is usually true, because excessive control is what fragments you, dividing your mind into the judge and the judged, the fixer and the broken. And once that inner conflict dissolves, you experience a natural coherence that guides your actions more intelligently than any rigid discipline ever could. Allowing emotions to exist without trying to correct them is one of the most radical forms of self-compassion, because instead of labeling sadness as weakness or anger as failure, you begin to treat each feeling like a visitor knocking gently at the door. And when you open that door with curiosity rather than resistance, the visitor stays only as long as necessary and then quietly leaves. I have cried on ordinary afternoons for no dramatic reason other than the body releasing years of unexpressed weight. And in those tears there was no story and no analysis, only a soft unwinding that felt strangely clean, as if something old were washing out of my system, and afterward there was a spaciousness that no technique had ever given me. From a physiological perspective, this makes perfect sense, because emotions are waves of energy moving through the nervous system. And when you suppress them, the energy remains trapped, creating chronic tension. Yet when you allow them to move freely, the system regulates itself naturally, returning to balance the way a forest returns to stillness after wind passes through the trees. From a more subtle perspective, you could say that every act of acceptance gently raises your frequency of awareness, not through effort, but through coherence, because resistance creates friction, while allowing creates flow, and flow is the state in which life expresses itself most fully without distortion. So instead of asking how to fix yourself, you might begin asking how to be kinder to yourself, how to listen more deeply to your body's signals, how to rest when you are tired without guilt, how to speak to yourself the way you would speak to a dear friend who has suffered enough. And these small shifts in attitude quietly transform your inner climate more effectively than any dramatic overhaul. Over time, you may notice that the parts of you that once felt broken start integrating on their own, like scattered pieces slowly finding their place without being forced. And this integration feels less like construction and more like remembering, less like becoming someone new, and more like returning to the person you were before the world convinced you that you were not enough. There is a deep relief in realizing that you are not a project to be completed, but a life to be lived. Not a problem to be solved, but a presence to be felt. And when this understanding settles into your bones, you stop chasing perfection and start appreciating the quiet miracle of simply being here, breathing, and aware. In this gentle, allowing something remarkable happens, because the more you release control, the more naturally aligned your actions become, as if an inner intelligence that was previously drowned out by noise now has space to guide you. And decisions arise with less struggle, relationships feel more honest, and the constant background pressure to become someone else slowly fades away. And one day, you look back and realize that the healing you tried so hard to manufacture arrived only after you stopped trying to manufacture it, like sleep that comes only when you stop chasing it. And you smile softly at the simplicity of it all, because the truth was never complicated. It was simply this quiet invitation to relax your grip, trust the current, and let life carry you the way water carries a leaf downstream without effort or fear. 7. You do not need to become someone else. There is a quiet exhaustion that comes from spending most of your life trying to become a better version of yourself, an upgraded self, a more spiritual self, a more successful self, as if who you are right now were merely a rough draft that must be edited and corrected before it deserves to be seen. And I have watched this exhaustion settle into the eyes of so many people over the years, especially those who have worked hard, raised families, carried responsibilities, and still secretly wonder why they never feel complete despite everything they have achieved. For decades, we are gently and not so gently trained to believe that fulfillment lies somewhere ahead of us in time, waiting at the end of some invisible ladder we must climb step by step. And this belief becomes so normal that we rarely question it, even when it quietly steals our peace. Because every time we reach a new milestone, the mind immediately invents another one and whispers that we are still not quite there yet, still not quite enough, still needing just one more improvement before we can finally rest. The tragedy of this pattern is not that we grow or evolve, because growth is natural and beautiful, but that we grow from a place of self-rejection rather than self-acceptance, which means no matter how far we travel, we carry the same sense of lack inside us, like a shadow that follows wherever we go. And so even success feels strangely empty because it is built on the assumption that who we were before was inadequate. I used to believe that awakening meant becoming extraordinary, becoming wiser than everyone else, calmer than everyone else, almost superhuman in my clarity and presence. And this image of spiritual perfection became just another mask to chase, another ideal that separated me from myself. And the more I tried to embody that ideal, the more artificial I felt, as if I were acting out a role rather than living honestly. There was a moment, after many years of seeking, when I noticed something very simple and almost embarrassing in its simplicity, which was that every time I tried to become someone else, I moved further away from the quiet intelligence that was already guiding my life. And every time I relaxed and allowed myself to be ordinary, flawed, and human, something gentle and real began to shine through without effort. It was like spending years trying to polish a stone into a diamond only to realize it had always been a diamond covered in dust. And all that was ever needed was a soft cloth and a patient hand rather than a hammer and chisel. Because force only damages what gentleness can reveal. Many people imagine awakening as fireworks, or visions, or some dramatic transformation that turns them into a completely different person. Yet in my experience, it feels more like taking off a heavy coat you forgot you were wearing, like loosening a tight pair of shoes after a long walk, like returning home at the end of a tiring day and finally sitting down in your favorite chair, because what you call enlightenment is often just the absence of unnecessary tension. You do not need to become a perfect version of yourself, because perfection is an idea invented by the mind, and the mind constantly changes its definition depending on what it sees around it, which means chasing perfection is like chasing the horizon. You can walk toward it forever and never arrive, while the simple truth of who you are has been standing quietly beneath your feet the entire time, waiting to be noticed. You do not need some grand mystical awakening that separates you from other human beings, because life is not asking you to float above the world, but to be deeply present within it, to taste your morning coffee, to feel the warmth of sunlight on your hands, to listen fully when someone speaks. And these small moments of awareness are far more transformative than any spectacular spiritual experience. There is something profoundly healing about giving yourself permission to be simple, to stop performing wisdom, to stop trying to sound enlightened, to stop measuring your inner life against anyone else's journey, and to instead rest in the quiet dignity of being exactly who you are in this moment, with your history, your scars, your laughter, your mistakes, and your tenderness, all included. I often think about the image of a child before the world teaches that child who to be, because a child does not wake up wondering whether they are enough or whether they should be more impressive. A child simply exists, curious and open and alive, moving toward what feels joyful and away from what feels painful without any complicated philosophy. And there is a natural wholeness in that state that many adults spend their entire lives trying to recover. That inner child has never truly disappeared, even if layers of fear and responsibility have covered it over time. And sometimes during quiet moments you can still feel it there. Perhaps when you laugh unexpectedly, or when you become absorbed in a piece of music, or when you watch the sky change colors at sunset and forget for a while all the roles you normally play. Because in those moments, you are not trying to be someone, you are simply being. Awakening, then, is not about constructing a new identity, but about remembering the one that existed before conditioning, before comparison, before the constant pressure to prove yourself. And this remembering feels less like effort and more like recognition, like meeting an old friend you somehow forgot you loved. From a deeper perspective, you could say that consciousness itself does not need improvement because it is already complete, and what you call personal growth is simply the gradual removal of misunderstandings that made you believe you were separate or deficient. So the journey is not upward towards something greater, but inward towards something truer. When you stop trying to become someone else, an enormous amount of energy is released because you are no longer fighting yourself. And that energy naturally expresses as kindness, creativity, patience, and quiet confidence. Not because you forced these qualities to appear, but because they were always there beneath the noise of self-doubt. You begin to speak more honestly because you are not trying to impress anyone. You begin to rest more deeply because you are not chasing imaginary standards. You begin to love more freely because you are no longer calculating whether you are worthy of love. And this simplicity feels almost too easy at first, as if something must be missing. Yet over time, you realize that ease is actually the signature of truth. I have sat with many people who believed they needed to fix themselves before they could live fully, and I have watched their shoulders soften and their eyes grow brighter when they finally understood that nothing fundamental was wrong with them, that their struggles were chapters of a story rather than evidence of failure, and that life was not demanding transformation into someone new, but inviting a gentle return to who they had always been. So if you ever feel the pressure to reinvent yourself completely, or to chase some idealized version of enlightenment, I hope you pause for a moment and breathe and remember that the oak tree does not try to become a pine tree and the river does not try to become the ocean before its time. Each simply expresses its own nature fully, and in doing so becomes beautiful without comparison. In the same way, you do not need to become anyone else, because the most authentic gift you can offer this world is not perfection or superiority, but your own unfiltered presence, your own lived experience, your own quiet light. And when you finally accept that you have always been enough, awakening stops feeling like a distant goal and begins to feel like coming home to yourself after a very long journey. 8. Presence is the highest gateway of energy. There is a gentle truth that took me many years to understand. A truth so simple that the mind often overlooks it while searching for something more dramatic. And that truth is that the peace you have been chasing across decades of memories and expectations has never lived in the past. You keep replaying, or in the future you keep trying to design, but has always been waiting quietly in this very breath, in this very moment, like a door that has stood open the entire time while you were busy knocking on distant walls. Most of us were trained to live everywhere except here, because the mind was conditioned to believe that survival depends on remembering every mistake behind us and predicting every possible danger ahead. So we carry the weight of yesterday like an old suitcase filled with regrets, and we drag the shadow of tomorrow like a cart full of worries. And somewhere between those two burdens, we forget how to simply stand still and feel the ground beneath our feet. The past has a strange gravity because it pulls us into stories that feel so real we forget they are only memories, and we replay old conversations, old failures, old heartbreaks, as if by analyzing them one more time we might finally change what has already ended. Yet every return to those scenes quietly drains our life force, because the body reacts as though those events are happening again right now, tightening the chest and clouding the mind with emotions that belong to another time. The future has its own illusion because it promises safety if only we plan carefully enough, achieve enough, secure enough. And while planning is natural, the mind often turns it into a form of anxiety that never rests, constantly scanning for problems that do not yet exist, creating storms out of possibilities, and keeping the nervous system on alert, as if peace were something dangerous to relax into. When you live suspended between regret and worry, you begin to feel fragmented, as though pieces of your energy are scattered across timelines that are not even real. And this fragmentation can feel like exhaustion without any clear cause, like waking up tired even after sleep, because your consciousness is never fully gathered in one place. It was only after years of this quiet inner turbulence that I discovered something almost embarrassingly obvious, which was that whenever I brought my attention gently back to the present moment, not with force but with curiosity, something inside me immediately softened, as if my whole being had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. I remember sitting alone one early morning with a cup of tea, watching the steam rise slowly into the air, and for a brief moment there was no story about who I had been or who I needed to become. There was only the warmth of the cup in my hands, the faint light through the window, and the simple rhythm of breathing. And in that ordinary scene, there was a depth of peace that no achievement had ever given me. That was the moment I began to understand that presence is not a technique but a home. Not something you practice to get somewhere else, but something you return to because it is where life is actually happening, and everything outside of it is only thought. From a scientific perspective, this makes quiet sense, because when you slow your breathing and rest your attention in the present, the nervous system shifts out of survival mode and into regulation. The heart rate steadies, the muscles relax, and the brain begins to synchronize its patterns more coherently. And this coherence feels subjectively like clarity and calm, because the body is no longer fighting imaginary threats. From a more subtle perspective, you could say that presence aligns your personal energy with the larger field of life itself, because when you are not resisting the moment or wishing it were different, you stop creating internal friction. And without that friction, your awareness becomes clear like still water reflecting the sky. When you breathe slowly and consciously, you may notice how the mind gradually quiets on its own, without being forced. Thoughts becoming softer and less urgent, like distant echoes rather than loud commands. And in that quiet space, you begin to sense something deeper than thought, something steady and spacious that has always been there, watching everything come and go. In that space, there is no comparison and no lack, because lack only exists in stories about what should have happened or what must happen next. While in this moment, nothing is missing, since life is already expressing itself fully as breath, sensation, sound, and awareness. And when you truly feel this, you realize how unnecessary so much of your struggle has been. I have often told friends that presence feels like putting down a heavy backpack you forgot you were carrying, because you do not gain anything new, yet everything feels lighter, and you suddenly have the energy to notice small beauties that were always around you. The rustling of leaves, the texture of the air after rain, the quiet kindness in someone's eyes. And these simple details begin to nourish you more deeply than any grand success ever could. Many people search for higher states of consciousness as if they were hidden on distant mountaintops. Yet what if the highest state is simply full presence right where you are, washing the dishes with complete attention, walking slowly without rushing to the next task, listening to another person without preparing your reply? Because in those moments, you are completely synchronized with life, rather than divided against it. When you are fully present, time itself seems to soften, because you are no longer measuring the moment against some future goal. And there is a quiet richness in even the most ordinary activities, as though each second contains more depth than you previously noticed. And this depth feels like a subtle energy that gently uplifts everything you do. Over time, you may discover that problems which once felt overwhelming lose some of their weight when viewed from presence, not because they disappear, but because you are no longer projecting catastrophic stories onto them. And without those stories, you can respond more intelligently and compassionately, guided by clarity rather than fear. To me, presence has become the highest gateway, not because it is mystical or dramatic, but because it is honest, because it asks nothing from you except that you show up fully for your own life. And when you do, something miraculous in its simplicity happens, which is that you realize you were never separate from the flow of existence to begin with. In this moment, as you read these words or listen to my voice, there is nothing you need to add to yourself and nothing you need to remove, because this breath is complete, this heartbeat is complete, this awareness is complete, and when you allow yourself to rest here without chasing or resisting anything, you naturally fall into harmony with the larger rhythm of the universe, like a single note blending perfectly into a vast and beautiful symphony that has been playing all along. 9. Trust the process, instead of forcing the outcome. There is a quiet kind of suffering that does not come from tragedy or loss, but from the constant pressure to make life move faster than it naturally wants to move. And I recognize this suffering intimately, because for many years, I lived as though every dream needed to be achieved immediately. Every wound needed to heal overnight, and every question needed an answer before I could allow myself to rest. And this restless urgency created an invisible tension in my body that followed me everywhere, like a shadow I could never quite escape. We are taught from a young age that effort is everything, and that if something is not happening, it must mean we are not trying hard enough. So we learn to push and strive and force results with the same mindset we might use to move heavy furniture across a floor. And while this approach may work for external tasks, it becomes strangely violent when applied to the inner life, because the heart does not respond well to pressure, and the soul does not bloom under command. There is a deep misunderstanding hidden inside the belief that growth must be forced, because nature itself has never operated that way. And if you look closely at the world around you with patient eyes, you begin to notice that everything meaningful unfolds according to its own rhythm, neither rushing nor delaying, simply following an intelligence that does not require anxiety to function. A seed does not wake up in the dark soil and panic because it has not yet become a tree, and it does not try to stretch itself open through willpower or compare its progress to the seeds beside it, because the seed trusts the quiet warmth of the earth and the steady nourishment of water and light. And in that trust, it grows at exactly the pace it is meant to grow, without any inner conflict. Yet human beings often do the opposite, digging themselves up every few days to check whether roots have formed, doubting the process, criticizing the timing, and then wondering why they feel exhausted and disconnected, because constant interference interrupts the very unfolding we are trying to accelerate. I remember periods of my life when I treated my own healing this way, constantly asking whether I was better yet, whether I was more awakened yet, whether the pain should have disappeared by now. And these questions sounded reasonable on the surface, but beneath them was a subtle message that something was wrong with me for not being further along, and that message quietly undermined the trust my system needed in order to relax and regenerate. The body itself offers a gentle lesson in this truth, because when you cut your skin or fall ill, you do not consciously command each cell to repair the damage. You simply rest, nourish yourself, and allow the natural intelligence of the body to do what it has always known how to do. And most of the time, healing happens silently in the background, without any dramatic effort on your part. If you interfere too much, by worrying or resisting or overworking yourself, the process often slows down. But when you create the conditions of rest and safety, the body reorganizes itself with astonishing wisdom. And this same principle applies to the emotional and spiritual layers of your being, even though we rarely trust it there. The soul, if we may use that simple word, also has its own timing, its own seasons, its own quiet cycles of contraction and expansion. And there are periods when everything seems to fall apart and nothing makes sense, followed by periods of clarity and renewal that arise without warning. And these phases are not mistakes, but movements within a larger rhythm that we do not always understand from our limited perspective. When you try to force clarity during a time meant for confusion, or force joy during a time meant for grieving, you create an inner resistance that only deepens the struggle, because you are arguing with the natural tide of your own life instead of floating with it. And arguing with the tide is a battle no one ever truly wins. There is a kind of maturity that develops when you begin to recognize these rhythms and stop interpreting every slow period as failure, because you start to see that winter is not the enemy of spring, but its preparation, and the quiet underground months are just as necessary as the visible blooming, even though they look empty from the outside. I have sat through many inner winters where nothing seemed to grow and everything felt uncertain, and during those times, my old habit was to panic and try to fix everything at once. Yet each time I chose instead to slow down and trust the stillness, something unexpected happened, which was that beneath the surface, a deeper strength was quietly forming, like roots spreading in darkness before any leaves appear. Trust, then, is not passive resignation but active cooperation with life, a willingness to participate without trying to dominate, a soft partnership rather than a rigid control, and this cooperation feels less like pushing a heavy door and more like walking through one that is already open. When you trust the process, you begin to sense that you are not carrying the whole universe on your shoulders, that you are allowed to rest sometimes, allowed to not know sometimes, allowed to simply breathe, and let the next step reveal itself in its own time. And this permission alone can dissolve years of accumulated stress. Your thoughts become less frantic because you are no longer trying to calculate every outcome. Your body becomes softer because it is not bracing against imagined failure, and your heart becomes more patient because it understands that what is meant for you cannot be missed, and what is not meant for you does not need to be chased. In this state of trust, actions still happen, decisions still get made, work still gets done, but they arise from clarity rather than desperation, like movements in a dance rather than blows in a fight, and there is a quiet grace in this way of living that feels sustainable, almost gentle, as if life were carrying you as much as you are carrying it. I often think of a river flowing toward the ocean, because the river does not force its way forward through sheer determination. It simply follows gravity, curving around obstacles, slowing in some places and rushing in others, yet always moving steadily without anxiety. And eventually it arrives exactly where it was always going, without ever needing to strain. Perhaps we are meant to live more like that river, trusting that there is a deeper current guiding us, even when the path bends in unexpected directions. Trusting that pauses are not punishments but preparations, and trusting that growth happens most naturally when we stop trying to control every detail and instead relax into the intelligence of life itself. When you finally allow yourself to trust this way, you may feel something inside you unclench for the first time in years, and in that softening, you realize that the journey was never meant to be forced into existence, but gently received, and that by cooperating with the flow, rather than fighting it, you discover a peace that has nothing to do with results and everything to do with simply being carried, moment by moment, by a process far wiser than the anxious mind could ever design. 10. Realize you were never broken. There is a quiet moment that eventually arrives on this journey. A moment so gentle that you might almost miss it if you are still looking for fireworks or dramatic revelations. And it comes like the soft light of early morning slipping through the curtains, touching your face without noise, whispering a truth that feels less like new information and more like an old memory returning. And in that moment, you begin to understand with surprising clarity that nothing about you was ever fundamentally wrong, that the long story of being broken was simply a misunderstanding you carried for far too long. For many years, you may have looked at your life the way a mechanic looks at a malfunctioning machine, searching for defects, analyzing every disappointment as evidence that something inside you must be flawed, replaying mistakes as though they were proof of unworthiness. And this habit of self-diagnosis can become so normal that you forget there is another way to see yourself, a way that is softer and far more truthful. When you believe you are broken, every memory becomes a courtroom, and every decision becomes a trial, and you stand there as both the accused and the judge, listing all the times you should have known better, should have done better, should have been stronger or wiser or more disciplined. And this constant inner judgment slowly drains the joy from even your achievements, because nothing ever feels quite enough to erase the imagined flaw. But one day, often after you have grown tired of fighting yourself, you may sit quietly and look back over your life, not with criticism but with compassion, and instead of seeing a series of failures, you begin to notice something else entirely, which is that every step, even the ones that hurt the most, carried you precisely to the place where you are now, shaping you, softening you, deepening you in ways you could not have planned. You start to see that what you once called mistakes were often the very experiences that opened your heart, that the relationships that ended taught you how to love more honestly, that the jobs you lost pushed you toward paths you never would have discovered otherwise, and that the moments you felt most lost were often the quiet turning points where a new direction was already forming beneath the surface. From this wider view, life begins to look less like a series of errors and more like a perfectly imperfect tapestry, woven with threads of joy and grief, success and confusion, each color necessary for the whole picture to exist. And if you were to remove the darker threads, the image itself would lose its depth and meaning. I remember sitting with my own memories one evening, not trying to fix anything, simply observing, and I realized that the younger version of me who made so many clumsy decisions was not foolish or defective, but simply doing the best he could with the awareness he had at the time. And this realization filled me with an unexpected tenderness, as if I were finally meeting an old friend I had unfairly blamed for years. There is something profoundly healing about forgiving your past self, about understanding that you were never meant to be perfect but only human, learning step by step through experience. And when this forgiveness settles into your heart, the heavy armor you have been wearing begins to fall away piece by piece. You begin to notice that there is actually nothing inside you that needs repair, because repair implies damage at the core. And what you find instead is that your essence has always remained intact, like the sky untouched by the storms that pass through it, and the clouds of fear and shame were only temporary weather, never the true nature of the sky itself. Perhaps what we call healing is not fixing what is broken, but simply brushing away the dust that accumulated over years of misunderstanding. Like wiping a mirror that has been covered for so long you forgot it could reflect light. And once the dust is gone, the clarity was always there, waiting patiently. This dust can take many forms. Old beliefs inherited from childhood, harsh words spoken by others, comparisons that convinced you that you were less than, expectations that were never truly yours. And none of these things are your essence. They are only layers that settled over time. And layers can always be gently removed. When you stop trying to rebuild yourself and instead start uncovering yourself, everything changes in a subtle yet profound way. Because you are no longer struggling to become something new, you are simply remembering what has always been true. And remembering requires far less effort than constructing an entirely new identity. In quiet moments of presence, you may feel this truth directly, not as a concept but as a sensation, a warm and steady aliveness in the center of your chest. A sense that beneath all the stories and roles, there is something whole and luminous that has never been harmed by anything that happened. And this feeling does not shout or demand attention. It simply rests there like a small, steady flame. That flame is what I think of as your original light, not something mystical or distant, but something deeply human. The simple awareness that allows you to love, to care, to notice beauty, to feel compassion for others. And if you look closely, you will see that this light has been with you through every chapter of your life, even when you believed you were lost. Awakening, then, is not the dramatic act of transforming darkness into light, but the gentle realization that the light was never gone, that you only forgot to look for it. And this realization brings a kind of relief that words can hardly capture, because you finally stop treating yourself like a problem that needs solving. When you understand that you were never broken, you move through the world differently. You speak to yourself with more kindness. You allow your imperfections without shame. You take risks without the fear of proving your worth, and you begin to live with a quiet confidence that does not depend on external approval, because it comes from knowing that your value was never in question. You start to look at others with the same compassion, recognizing that they too are not broken but simply covered in their own layers of dust. And this understanding softens your judgments and opens your heart, creating connections that feel more authentic and less defensive. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this realization is how simple it is, how ordinary and natural it feels once you stop overthinking it, because it is not a grand philosophy or a complicated doctrine. It is merely the gentle truth that you have always been enough, always been whole, always been light, even during the times when you could not see it. So as you stand here now, at this point in your journey, breathing quietly, listening to these words, You might allow yourself to look back with gratitude rather than regret, to see every detour as guidance, every fall as instruction, every scar as evidence of survival, and to understand with deep and steady certainty that nothing about you needs to be fixed, because beneath the dust of old stories you have always been exactly what you are now, a living expression of life itself, complete, resilient, and quietly radiant. A gentle closing, like dawn arriving without effort. Maybe nothing is wrong with you, and I want you to hear those words slowly, not as a slogan or a quick reassurance, but as something you allow to sink into the quiet spaces of your body, because for most of your life, you may have carried the opposite belief, like a hidden weight in your chest. The belief that something about you was defective, or incomplete, or somehow less than everyone else. And that belief has shaped so many of your choices that you might not even remember what it feels like to exist without it. So I'm not speaking to you from a stage or from some imagined place of perfection. I am speaking as someone who has sat alone on the kitchen floor late at night, wondering why life felt so heavy, as someone who has questioned his worth more times than he can count, as someone who once believed that if he just tried harder or fixed himself more thoroughly, everything would finally make sense. And it is precisely because I have walked through that darkness that I can now speak to you with such quiet certainty. There were years when I thought I was falling apart, years when old identities crumbled, when relationships changed, when the future I had carefully planned dissolved in ways I did not understand. And during those times, I kept asking myself what was wrong with me, why I could not simply be normal, or stable, or confident like everyone else seemed to be. And every question carried the assumption that the problem must be me. But looking back now with older eyes and a softer heart, I see something entirely different. Because what I once called collapse was actually release. What I once called failure was actually redirection. And what I once called breaking was actually opening, like a seed splitting apart in the soil. Not because it is damaged, but because something inside it is ready to grow beyond its shell. You are not shattering into pieces, even if it sometimes feels that way when old certainties disappear and familiar roles no longer fit, because what is happening is far more tender and intelligent than destruction. It is more like a door slowly unlocking from the inside, more like tight knots loosening one by one, more like windows being opened in a house that has been closed for too long. And I know how frightening that can feel, because the mind prefers what is predictable, even if it is painful. So when life begins to rearrange itself, the ego interprets it as danger. Yet beneath that fear, there is a deeper movement, guiding you towards something more honest and more spacious than anything you have known before. So right now, wherever you are, whether you are sitting in your living room or lying in bed or watching this quietly with a cup of coffee in your hands, I want to invite you into something very simple and very human. Something that does not require belief or effort or spiritual knowledge. Something you have been doing since the day you were born, without ever needing to be taught. Place your hand gently over your heart, not as a dramatic gesture, but as a small act of kindness toward yourself. And feel the warmth of your palm against your chest. Feel the subtle rise and fall of your breath. Feel the steady rhythm that has carried you through every joy and every sorrow, without ever asking for praise. And just for a moment, allow yourself to stop trying to improve anything at all. As you breathe in slowly and breathe out even more slowly, notice how the body responds when it is not being pushed or judged. Notice how the shoulders soften, how the jaw unclenches, how the mind becomes a little quieter, and in that quiet space you may begin to sense a gentle truth that has always been there beneath the noise. You are not broken. You are becoming aware, and awareness does not arrive like a lightning strike, but like the gradual brightening of the sky before sunrise. So subtle at first that you almost doubt it is happening, yet little by little the darkness loses its grip, and shapes that were once hidden begin to appear with surprising clarity. Becoming aware means you start to notice your thoughts instead of being controlled by them. You start to feel your emotions without drowning in them. You start to question old beliefs that never truly belong to you. And although this process can feel disorienting, it is actually a sign that consciousness is waking up inside you, like someone gently opening their eyes after a long sleep. And just like waking up in the morning, there can be a brief moment of confusion where everything feels blurry and unfamiliar. Yet you would never call that confusion a problem, because you know it is simply part of the transition from dreaming to being fully awake. And in the same way, this stage of your life is not a crisis but a crossing. Not an ending, but a beginning you have not yet learned how to name. I sometimes think of dawn when I speak about this, because dawn never struggles to arrive and the sun never forces itself over the horizon. There is no strain or urgency in the sky, only a quiet inevitability as light slowly replaces darkness. And the world brightens not through effort but through readiness, as if the night itself gently steps aside when its time is complete. Your awakening is like that, not something you must manufacture through willpower, but something that unfolds naturally when you stop resisting, when you stop telling yourself that you are wrong, when you finally allow yourself to be exactly where you are, and in that, allowing the light that has always lived within you begins to reveal itself without noise. So if there is one thing I hope you carry with you after all these words, it is not another technique or another rule or another standard to meet, but this simple and compassionate understanding that you were never a mistake in need of correction, that you were never a problem to be solved, and that every step of your journey has been guiding you gently back to yourself. Maybe nothing is wrong with you. Maybe you are not falling apart at all. Maybe you are simply opening like the morning sky. And maybe, just maybe, the light you have been searching for has already begun to rise from within, waiting patiently for you to notice that it has been there all along.